searing heat, record temperatures, as millions suffer from heat waves across the globe and wildfires rage. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Large parts of the world are suffering from deadly heat waves that are setting new records and raising the alarm about the rapid pace of climate change. In the United States, temperature records were shattered in several cities over the last few days, and tens of millions are under heat alerts from coast to coast. Meanwhile, wildfires are raging in Greece, where thousands have been evacuated. And China is facing one of its hottest summers ever. We have a great panel to talk about all of this. Joining me now is Shweta Chakraborty. She is the CEO of North American operations for the social media company We Don't Have Time. Also with us from Perth, Australia, is Changhua Wu. She is the CEO of the Beijing Future Innovation Center and Executive Director of the Professional Association for China's Environment. With us too from London is Bob Ward. He is Policy and Communications Director for the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. And joining the discussion here in Washington, D.C. is Abdullahi Boru Halaki. He is an Africa Security and Policy Analyst. Welcome to all of you. Shweta, let's start right here in the United States. I mean, as we are all aware, there's a heat wave sweeping across the country. It started out in the southwest and it's been sweeping eastwards, moving eastwards. And over this weekend, in fact, on Sunday, in the city of Phoenix, which is in Arizona, in the southwest, it hit a record of the 24th day of temperatures in the mid-40s. That's about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So what's driving these high temperatures, and what are the risks inherent when we see these kind of levels of heat?
Yes, thank you for that, Anand. We have 80 million Americans that are currently under heat warnings, and this is only going to increase. You must have heard this refrain already in the news, but this is the coldest summer for the rest of your lives, and that's true here in the United States and around the world. There was a Nature study in 2017 that showed 30% of the world's population was living in areas that had dangerous combinations of heat and humidity. And this number is projected to increase to half the world's population by the end of the century. Some combination of deadly heat and deadly humidity leads to really bad outcomes for human beings. Heat can cause death in 3 ways. It can lead to heat stroke, your organs will fail, it can lead to heart attack, and it can lead to kidney failure, not to mention several other adverse outcomes from being exposed to dangerous heat and humidity too long. So that's the inherent risk that heat poses to human health, not to mention how much heat impacts every aspect of our lives. It makes food systems that much more strained. It's harder to farm land when you have scorched earth. Heat results in increased wildfires, and we're seeing that in the United States, in North America more broadly, and all around the world. In Europe, we're seeing tennis ball-sized hail. And so these are the impacts of heat, which is an impact of climate change and to be expected as the planet continues to warm.
And Shweta, as we see these temperatures rise, I mean, do you see that there is definitely a progression in the heat that we're seeing over the years? And as you point out, this is set to get higher.
More examples to showcase that this is getting worse is we just broke the record for frozen sea ice. So the lowest, the record previously for frozen sea ice was beaten by 10%, and that's significant. These are all examples of how this heat is having an exponential impact on Earth's systems. And it's not just on land, it's not just frozen ice. There's also extreme marine heat waves that are happening. In fact, NOAA is calling it beyond extreme. There was a heat wave in the Atlantic Ocean, Northern Atlantic, that has never been seen before. And of course, a lot of this is being even made worse because it's an El Nino year. So it's hotter than it would normally be had these other factors not been at play. But the combination of El Nino and the global temperature continuing to tick up is resulting in these record-breaking temperatures. It's getting worse. It will continue to get worse. And that is something that we can we can all agree upon, I'm sure, on this panel.
Bob Ward, great to have you with us. As Shweta pointed out a moment ago, there's also a major heat wave sweeping across the European continent, and it's been blamed in part for the wildfires that we've been seeing in Greece. In fact, people had to be rescued, evacuated from some parts of Greece. Europe is now the fastest heating continent and region. How critical is the situation?
Well, Europe had a brutal summer heat wave last year that killed more than 60,000 people. It's too soon to tell how many people are dying at the moment in Europe, but it'll be substantial. As you mentioned, it's not just the heat itself, but the heat is causing the wildfire season to become longer and more intense as it is around the world. That's also affecting large parts of Greece and other parts of the Mediterranean region. It also has a devastating impact on productivity because, particularly in the northern European countries, which are not used to dealing with heat, like the UK, productivity goes down because offices overheat, infrastructure fails, such as railways. So it's a huge impact, and it's all the result of us having not responded quickly and effectively enough to the scientists' warnings. And we are now on a pathway where it's just going to get worse until we get global emissions of greenhouse gases to net zero. The earliest date that countries have been talking for that is 2050. That means for the next 2 or 3 decades, it's just going to get worse, and we're going to have to learn to become more resilient and adapt to this increasing impact of extreme heat.
Changhua, China has also been seeing very, very high temperatures. In fact, Beijing recorded its hottest day in 60 years this summer. I mean, how concerned is China about this extreme heat, and what is the outlook there for this summer?
Well, China is one of the countries that are mostly exposed to climate change, extreme weather events. China is also located in the northern hemisphere. At this moment, what we're experiencing now is that climate change warming is intensifying. Now the return of El Nino definitely has made it even worse, and now it's also summertime. So with all the factors coming together, so we are bearing the scorching heat at this moment and suffering from the process there. And what's even more worrisome actually is the compounding factors, because as Shweta mentioned early on, and we started to see much faster melting of the Antarctica, Arctic, and even Tibetan plateau, the Himalaya glaciers there. And the sea temperature, surface temperature has been rising. It's really worrisome. And if you look at the melting of the permafrost, we started to have more methane literally emitted from those areas as well. So all the factors coming together, definitely we are living in much worrying, getting worse sort of situation. China, as we talked about early on, and like other parts of the world, in the northern part of China, we've been witnessing or experiencing extreme heats, very high temperatures already on record. In the meantime, in the southern part of the country, it's living through this sort of intensified typhoon seasons, extreme storms there as well. So with such a sort of situation getting worse, China probably is more than ever needs to learn how to quickly adapt, enhance its resilience. I think that's another sort of part of the efforts the government made already. We started to really implement early warning systems to make sure we protect, and prevent, people and the properties, food safety, energy security, among others. So it requires more than ever the resources and the expertise and capability together to really, enhance our resilience.
Abdullahi, the heat wave is also sweeping the Middle East as well as parts of North Africa. In fact, we saw temperatures in Tunisia go up to 49 degrees, and there's been wildfires which have been sweeping across from Syria all the way to Algeria. How's the region coping?
It's now coping very well. I think, as all the panelists have spoken about, we are living in uncharted territories when like the previous speaker said, we have more compounding effects of all these coming together. You know, for particularly the Horn of African countries, what you see is not just El Nino, but you are also witnessing the Indian Ocean dipole, because if the surface ocean temperatures increase in the Atlantic, it has, the opposite effect on the Indian Ocean. What that means is places like Somalia that has been experiencing 5 uninterrupted drought season now will experience flooding. So places like Mozambique will now probably in other parts of Southern Africa, because of that, are going to experience dry seasons. So what does that impact? That impacts food security, because just a classic example, there are 2 countries on the continent, that is Somalia and South Sudan, that provides the contrasting realities of being at the sharp end of the front line of climate change. South Sudan, one part of that country is experiencing flooding. As a result, they are not farming. Somalia, for the last few years now, has been experiencing absolute devastation because of drought. It's not just Somalia, though. If you look at not just Tunisia, but also the countries in the Sahel, as well as the Lake Chad Basin, a lot of the conflicts that you're witnessing in that part of the world is a function in part of fighting over natural resources, including water and pasture, because it's an area predominantly reliant on, for its livelihood, on pastoralism, or having a huge stock of livestock that moves from one part of the country to another. High temperatures prevents that, and then they're all concentrated in one region, and then that creates real problems. So food insecurity, conflict, those are the primary drivers. And just to add, because of climate change, what you will see is more people migrating, not just within the continent, but also to the western part via the Mediterranean Sea, and that will create more problems, Adnan.
Shweta, Abdullahi was talking about uncharted territory. It's a term that we've heard scientists say. They say the Earth is now in uncharted territory. It's a bit unnerving, if not terrifying. What does that mean?
That means we need to prepare for a world that humans have never actually lived on before. This is a new planet that we are inhabiting now, and we need to make it hospitable for as many people as possible. We need to recognize these trends are going to be increasing in nature. So my fellow panelist, Abdullah, was just talking about human migration. Well, we know humans are not going to stay in an area that is too hot to live in. People will not stay and die. They will migrate, and they will migrate north. And so we can predict that there's going to be movements of people from the lower latitudes to the more north latitudes. And so how do we prepare for that? How do we receive populations of people that are migrating? These are things that we can think about and get ahead of. And this, of course, is a bigger security issue. This is a global security issue. We see the direct impact of heat on global security. It doesn't allow training for militaries in the United States, North America, around the world, because it is not safe to train and prepare troops in environments that are over 95 degrees Fahrenheit, because at that temperature point, sweat does not evaporate off the body. And so it's too dangerous to be engaging in any sort of physical activity outside. We're not even talking about agriculture or construction. We're talking about actual training for security purposes. So that actually reduces a country's preparedness against any sort of violence within a country, across borders. And so heat has a direct impact on global security, national security. There's a correlation between increased conflict and crime, as well as hotter temperatures. So we see these are all trends that are going to be things to think about as the planet warms up, but also we know they're coming and we can get ahead of them.
Right, and what is your expectation of what Bob Ward was telling us about the fact that the earliest date for us to reach net zero would be 2050? I mean, what about the efforts that are being made right now? Is it going to help us get to that point in 2050?
I think we have to really see where the countries are going to be coming in at COP28 in Dubai in the end of November, beginning of December of this year. We need to see how far countries have come since the pledges and promises that were made in Egypt in last year in 2022. And so based on where we can map progress, we can get a better indication as to whether or not these goals are going to actually be met. I believe that we've made progress, but not nearly as fast as needed to be able to keep warm. And we've already passed the point of warming that we needed to stay below by the end of the century. We're basically past that benchmark that we've set for ourselves. And so now we need to really ramp up promises and pledges to ensure that we don't get to a point of warming where there's no comfortable scenario for any inhabitants on Earth. Right now, we are at a point where we need to help as many as possible have a future. It's going to be widespread discomfort, but there is still an opportunity to help as many as possible. And that's what we have to contend with. Where is our moral compass now? How many people are we going to create a future for that is still hospitable?
Bob Ward, we've been talking about climate change for a long time. I know for the past decade, perhaps for the last 2 or 3 decades, we've been talking about this. But we have not seen the conditions in the past that we are seeing right now. I mean, how did the climate crisis get so bad so quickly?
Well, scientists have been warning for a very long time. The first report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was in 1990. They were making very clear where we were headed. And unfortunately, we have made some progress, but frankly, we're just not rising to the challenge. And we don't have political leaders at the moment who are rising to the challenge. When countries meet in Dubai later this year, they will be carrying out something called the Global Stocktake, where they'll be assessing progress towards cutting emissions. We already know that it's going to be hopelessly off track. We are going to be smashing through the 1.5 degree warming threshold that all countries have agreed is significant. It's going to lead to more suffering. And, you know, it's frankly a very scary situation when you have Donald Trump, the leading Republican in the presidential race at the moment for next year's presidential election, who thinks that climate change is a hoax. I mean, it's frightening to have somebody of that prominence telling people not to believe their own eyes. We can all see climate change is happening all around us now. It's having increasing impacts. It's going to make the world a less safe, less prosperous place. And we have to now raise our game and really, really start to make the cuts in emissions that are required. And we know how to do it. It's simply a question of phasing out fossil fuels, but we have to sweep aside the incompetence and corruption that is currently holding back many of our political systems and allowing fossil fuels to carry on, and fossil fuel interests to carry on with their businesses, which are driving climate change. It's carbon dioxide released by fossil fuel consumption, which is the main driver of climate change.
Changhua, we're also seeing the climate crisis fall out across Asia. In fact, if we look at India, we've seen very heavy monsoon storms there. It's been drenching the region. I mean, what about a country like Pakistan, which actually went through a devastating storm season last year? What are expectations there?
I think the people on the ground are definitely expecting more support and help, particular financial, technology, infrastructure, whatever you name it, to help them rebuild, build back, and as well as enhance their resilience. Partly also getting compensated for the climate change impact that they have to bear unfairly at this moment. So at this moment, I think what's depressing is that developed countries in particular have not been able to deliver their financial commitment. Not only say compensating, but also really just say deliver the $100 billion every year before 2020 that has never been delivered yet. And now, particularly last year in Egypt, as well as the year before in Glasgow, global community has also recognized that we need more financial support from developed countries to developing countries to support them in terms of the adaptation and the resilience. So that remains a major issue on the table leading up to COP28. Particularly around this climate loss and damage fund. We'll see what's going to happen at this moment. As John Kerry mentioned at the Congress hearing recently, that the U.S. will never, under no circumstances, will provide financial compensation, actually climate compensation to developing countries there. But in the meantime, I think at the local level, more than ever, urgently, developing countries need to really accelerate to transition their energy, enhance their clean energy infrastructure, and really using multilateral, particularly development bank financing, with all the climate commitment financing resources out there to build their clean energy system and enhance their infrastructure resilience. Hopefully somehow they will be able to do better rather than where they are today.
Abdullahi, what is the situation on the continent of Africa as far as the transition to more renewable sources of energy? I mean, is there any progress being made?
I think the reality is the energy transition, the clean green energy transition requires justice. You cannot ask countries like Somalia and South Sudan, who have practically not contributed even 1% to the carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emission, for them to transition into a clean green energy without being supported on that journey. And South Africa is a good example. You know, they say, I mean, South Africa was going to be incentivized to be able to do that. But I think down the road, the rich countries, especially around loss and damages that they say they will help these countries, they have not done so. Like countries like Kenya, over 80% of its energy supply is clean green energy. But what incentive do these countries have if they are not going to be supported to be able to transition into the clean green energy that they need? So I think that there needs to be an element of justice in this. And ahead of COP28 in Dubai, I think the reality is we've got to be very honest that nothing much will come. Just like Glasgow, just like Cairo, Abu Dhabi will also be another talking shop. All the while, people are bearing the brunt of climate change, adverse consequences of climate change, not just on the continent that is going to bear more, plus the Asian countries, but also in some of the most developed countries. This civilization that we have is in peril. And the idea that we are playing political games, we are playing blame games with each other, we are kicking this down the road, we are setting unrealistic expectations that we are not going to meet by 2030, 2050, 20 whatever. So that is a really, really critical stage. We are at a point where we say that we have a window, but we don't have the house. We're talking about the window, we don't have the house. People are literally boiling. People are moving from one place to another. Some lifestyles are going to be extinct. The marine lifestyle that we've come to depend on is going to be extinct. Agriculture as we know it is not going to be there anymore. What more alarm bells do we need? What more do the civilization needs for us to say, for a second, let's stop this? And there are examples. There are examples in the past. Acid rain, the global compact that came together and that was solved. It can be solved.
Yeah.
The globe is held hostage by a few, fossil fuel corporations that are making record profits as the world is boiling.
Shweta, it all sounds very, very dire, and now we even have experts who are telling us that the heat waves could become 12 times more frequent by 2040. But getting back to the point of what is being done about this, why, at its core, why is there a lack of political will to fix this?
So it's not lost on me that your program is called The Heat, and we're talking about the heat, and it's important to talk about heat because otherwise you can't see it, right? I mean, yes, we're feeling it, it's summertime, but it's that invisible silent killer. Scientists have known for decades that heat actually causes more deaths than all the other impacts of climate change combined. In the United States, hundreds of people are dying from heat and thousands are being hospitalized, and that's in a country that has air conditioning. So when you see widespread failure of energy grids and that then impacts air conditioning, what happens to countries that aren't adapting to this kind of heat without the protection of energy and air conditioning? So we're in this false sense of safety right now in the United States and North America and Western countries that we can escape heat waves because of technology, and it's almost making it easier to not notice this invisible silent killer. But the reality is that we need to talk about heat. We need to make it visible. We need to show more pictures. Those who aren't experiencing it, that might still deny its impact, need to be communicated to about how risky heat is. And so your program and these conversations are absolutely critical. That's what will bring that political will. The more we talk about this, the more we communicate about this, the more we show pictures, the more we tell stories, the more that we make it absolutely shameful to not act, will result in the political will to put in place policies that are, of course, are going to prevent worser case scenarios from happening, to mitigate against worst case outcomes from the planet warming, but really to adapt. We have to adapt. We can't count on energy and air conditioning. We need to create shade, natural shade, something as simple as more terrascaping. We need to learn from countries that have lived in, that exist in the lower latitudes, on how to develop cities and communities that protect their communities from heat. We need longer hours at public pools. These are the kinds of things that we need to adapt to. We need the political will to get behind.
And Bob Ward, as we get to these tipping points, as they've been called, points of no return, really, I mean, if you take the European continent, I mean, what kind of long-term plan do the Europeans have?
Well, I don't think any country really knows what to expect. We're in uncharted territory. We're going to perhaps see changes in the climate that we have no experience of, not just historically, but as a species. If we destabilize the land-based ice sheets in Greenland and West Antarctica, that'll lock in several meters of sea level rise over the coming decades and centuries. It will redraw the map of the world, essentially. So we have to be laser focused on bringing climate change to a halt as soon as possible. The only way of doing that is through getting to net zero emissions. That means getting away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible, moving much more quickly to those technologies that can replace them, and we know how to do it. And there's a failure of economic understanding amongst many politicians that this is actually better for our economy. Right. It's worse to remain hooked on fossil fuels.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.